This week is the kind of news week where I looked at the April 20th eclipse in the South Pacific and decided the eclipse wasn't a huge news priority. Between watching Starship's will it, won't it launch attempts to getting news of new discoveries in cosmology and new software in planetary science and the discovery of totally weird rock formations on Mars, and there's a lot going on out there. And I have to admit, an eclipse that isn't visible anywhere where now media airs is generally a fairly low priority event. Except this eclipse is the first eclipse since December 2021. And it's a reminder that we are about a year away from a total solar eclipse crossing through the United States and just a few months away from a partial eclipse. On October 14th, 2023, our moon will be particularly distant from the Earth as it passes between the sun and observers in the Americas. A more distant moon is a moon that appears smaller, and a smaller moon doesn't fully block the disk of the sun. This means folks along the center of the moon's shadow will still see a ring of sunlight. I, for one, am excited to see this. But my colleagues who have successfully seen total eclipses, they like to tell me annular eclipses are only ho-hum compared to the total eclipse. And we'll have a total eclipse on April 8th, 2024. With that event occurring in less than a year, now is actually the time to start planning your travel if you want to see what I'm told is a totally transformative celestial experience. Just avoid being wherever I happen to be. I've so far managed to see exactly 0 total eclipses and have been rained on twice and then cursed by the tiniest of sun-blocking clouds. I wish you all luck. And tell me what you see. I, for one, have learned it's best for me to stick to the science that is coming to you right here, right now on Escape Velocity Space News. I am your host, Dr. Pamela Gay, and I am here to put science in your brain. Not every news story we cover comes to us via press release. Sometimes a scientist finds a really cool thing and shares it on social media. And then other scientists retweet or reshare that cool thing. And eventually, someone on our team sees it and writes a story about it. That's kind of the case with this first story about an interesting rock on Mars. Except that the picture was shared by Natalie Cabral, who works with our interviewer, Beth Johnson, who shared the picture on social media in the first place. And then I saw it as it got passed on by other people, and I wanted to know more. So here we are. Weird rocks on Mars are nothing new. We talked about pareidolia a few weeks ago and how one rock looked like a face until higher resolution images came along. This particular weird rock was captured in images taken by the mast cam on NASA's Curiosity rover in Gale Crater. And there isn't just one weird rock, there are quite a few. First seen in a panorama published in the site Gigapan, these strange rocks seem to have spikes coming out of their sides that look almost like fish bones. Those spikes are what caught Cabral's attention, leading her to post about the rock on her Facebook page, Planetary Landscape, saying, quote, "In 30 years of studying Mars, that's the most bizarre rock I have ever seen. I think it is about 50 to 75 centimeters in length with differential erosion and or crystal growth. I saw this type of thing in Chile in a dry lake bed. Bacteria were involved there." End quote. Admittedly, mentioning bacteria made the image all the more provocative. And for the next 24 hours or so, guesses ranged from the rational crystal formation to the more fantastical dune like sandworms. I personally am here for the sandworms. Natalie went on to explain that the rocks are sandstone, gypsum, and volcanic layers compacted over time and are indicative of a wet environment evaporating into a dry environment. David Grinspoon noted on Twitter that the rocks have, quote, rhythmically repeating perturbances, end quote. In the end, more detailed black and white images from Curiosity's ChemCam revealed that the rhythmically repeating perturbances really were crystallized spikes of some unknown material that weathered much less easily than the surrounding sediment. Cabral referred to the answer as resistant rippled mud flat sediments. Water breaks down rock into smaller and smaller pieces, especially when that water is in motion due to ocean tides or river streams. Those sediments get deposited on the floor of the body of water and along shorelines. Over time, the sediments get compacted together and, through heat and pressure, end up cemented together into new rocks. Now, those movements of the water also cause ripple marks to last in the new rocks, meaning you can see the curves of where the water could reach. When that water interacts with the sediment, it can cause crystals to grow that are different and much more resistant to future weathering and erosion than the surrounding rock. Over time, winds can wear down those newer rocks, but not the larger, more solid crystal structures. And that's how we end up left with spikes coming out of sedimentary rock at regular intervals. That's not to say that bacteria wasn't involved for certain. Bacteria moving throughout the rocks can chemically cause similar reactions in crystal growth. But bacteria aren't required to cause the crystal growth. All bets are off if we find signs of worm tubes in the rocks, though. The things we see on other worlds often remind us of things we see here on Earth, but the scale of things can be deeply confusing. Take, for instance, this image of Jupiter's moon, Ganymede. At a certain level, it looks very much like the chaos my fish and snails make in the sand at the bottom of my fish tank. To my astronomically trained eye, taken out of context, this image could totally contain worm sign. But those features aren't small. On airless moons, weather doesn't wear away at the landscape, and a sharp-edged pebble and a sharp-edged boulder will look wonderfully identical. And in the case of this image, the ridges are massive icy ridges, poxmarked with craters from asteroid impacts. The grooves in the ice are the sites of landslides triggered by moonquakes. And those apparently smooth valley floors between ridges are actually filled with debris from the landslides. Essentially, quakes cause new landslides, and they also smooth out the debris from old landslides, much like tapping on the side of a bowl of flour will smooth out the flour. A paper describing this phenomenon is published in Icarus and led by Mackenzie Mills. As I said, this image is for the icy moon Ganymede, which happens to be the largest moon. Ganymede is actually larger than Mercury and has a fair amount of gravity. On other moons, quakes can have much more wild effects. Researcher and study co-author Robert Palpadaro explained that on Saturn's moon Enceladus, quote, because of that moon's small gravity, quakes on tiny Enceladus could be large enough to fling icy debris right off the surface and into space like a wet dog shaking itself off, end quote. Future missions like the currently planned Europa Clipper and the just launched JUICE mission to Jupiter will provide us better images in the future and allow us to further understand the weird geology of these icy worlds. After the break, we're going to leave our solar system and look at some more distant science. Stay tuned. One of the weirdest looking telescopes in the world has shown us that the universe is less bizarre than we had recently come to believe. As the story goes, researchers looking at the evolution of the universe had come to two conflicting conclusions based on what data they used. Researchers looking at the cosmic microwave background and researchers looking at supernovae in the near and middle distances had measured the universe to be expanding in two different and conflicting rates. There had also been a variety of observations that seemed to indicate that maybe the distribution of matter wasn't quite what was expected, but those observations were only preliminary. Now, the Atacama Cosmology Telescope has released a systematic survey of the distribution of matter throughout the universe, and they've measured both the lumpiness of the universe throughout time and the rate of our universe's expansion. Their results, worked on by 160 collaborators over more than 15 years, find that our universe, when you look at all you can see, actually does match our standard model of cosmology. For this project, they looked at tiny distortions in light from the cosmic microwave background that have been shaped by the gravity of objects between us and those places the light left from more than 13 billion years ago. According to researcher Matthew Madhava Sharel, quote, remarkably, it provides measurements that show that both the lumpiness of the universe and the rate at which it is growing after 14 billion years of evolution are just what you'd expect from our standard model of cosmology based on Einstein's theory of gravity. End quote. To explain why their results differed from past results, researcher Blake Sherwin points out that past studies used, quote, a different background light, one emitted from stars and galaxies rather than the cosmic microwave background. These have produced results that suggest the dark matter was not lumpy enough under the standard model of cosmology and led to concerns that the model may be broken. However, the team's latest results from the Atacama Cosmology Telescope were able to precisely assess that the vast lumps seen in this image are the exact right size. End quote. These results are being presented at the meeting Future Science with the Cosmic Microwave Background and Large-Scale Structure. I can't wait to see published results that allow me to compare their details with other papers. But for now, I'm pleased to know a solution to the cosmological crisis may be near. There is a lot of stuff going on out in space. At a certain point, I feel like I can end the show there. At the largest scales, we now know things seem to match our standard model of cosmology, and there's a lot of stuff going on out in space. But besides being obnoxious, those statements hide a myriad of weird and wonderful things. While not the most exciting story of the week, one of my favorite news items is the story of a 200,000 light year long filament of baby stars and the black hole that likely triggered their formation. According to a new paper in the astrophysical journal Letters, in 2022, the Hubble Space Telescope spotted a line of stars extending away from the dwarf galaxy RCP 28. Both the galaxy and the streak are quite faint, and remarkably, they are essentially the same color, which usually means they are made of the same kinds of stars. According to the paper, this kind of a pairing hasn't been seen before, and the team, led by Peter van Dokkum, included this feature in a scheduled observing run with the Keck Observatory. The new data revealed the galaxy has star formation and an irregular shape that are both consistent with the galaxy experiencing a recent merger. It also showed that the streak was truly weird. We see streaks in astronomy all the time. Generally, they are caused by jets from disks of black holes or other high-density stellar remnants. and jets from extremely young stars. When jets interact with their environment, we see them spread out and lose power as they move farther away from their source. This is consistent with what we see from water fountains and even laser beams passing through dust or air. This streak, however, is more tightly focused, further from the galaxy than near the galaxy. And the streak is made of young stars, not tightly beamed gas. And while we've seen jets that caused star formation in the past, those jets, like all jets, were associated with a disk of material, a disk that isn't evident around the core of this particular galaxy. It's a weird system. Dockham and his team postulate that what we might be seeing is a trail of star formation left behind by a runaway supermassive black hole that has been flung out of the dwarf galaxy after a merger. The physics of a three-body system isn't entirely stable. And if this system had three supermassive black holes in its core, brought together through mergers between systems, it's possible one of those three dark objects was flung out. As it has traveled through space, it has shocked stars into forming. The stars closest to the dwarf galaxy formed first and have now started to slowly drift apart. The stars furthest away have formed most recently and are still close together. In this particular scenario, the star formation triggering supermassive black hole might not be the only runaway system. The team postulates that the other two supermassive black holes left the dwarf galaxy in the opposite direction, where they may have created shocks but haven't triggered star formation. This would leave the dwarf galaxy without any black holes in its center. And observationally, that seems to be the case. The team is now waiting for time on the JWST to further study this system and see if they can zero in on the black holes, or at least on the effects the black holes have on their surroundings. Since it first started sending back images last summer, the JWST has been allowing us to see familiar objects in entirely new ways. Its latest target of exploration is the Cassiopeia A supernova remnant. Formed by a stellar explosion in the 1690s, Cassiopeia A shines faintly in optical light as a diffuse ring just visible in large amateur telescopes. Prior to JWST's images, it was assumed that Cass A formed in the center of a thick cloud of material that had been shed by its parent star prior to that star's explosion. These layers of material are clearer than ever before in JWST's new image. Located about 11,000 light years away, this cloud of material spans approximately 10 light years. The combination of a young age and a relatively nearby location allows us to get a detailed look at how material from the star's explosion is interacting with surrounding material. In this false color image, we can see orange and red from warm dust heated by the impact of material from the explosion. Inside this smooth orange ring are more sharply detailed filaments in light pink. This is material from the supernova itself. There is also a weird green loop that so far has defied explanation. But this is just an image release. This is NASA saying, hey, look at this awesome image, and letting us share in the researchers' excitement prior to a science paper being published. When those new results come out, we'll bring them to you right here on EVSN. After the break, I'll be back to talk about Starship and how this new rocket is set to transform space exploration. Only the me that will be coming back, it's future me. At the time of this recording, Starship hasn't actually tried to launch, so we're going to let our editors start editing these parts of the show, and future me is going to tell you what happened. Stay tuned. Thank you, past me. We're recording this segment on Thursday, April 20th, a few hours after SpaceX had its first launch of their Super Heavy rocket with a Starship spacecraft perched on top. Eric is going to go into a bit more detail in the next segment, but let me give you high points real fast. At 8:33 a.m. Central Time, Starship 24 lifted off atop Super Heavy Booster 7. During launch, keen eyes and well-pointed cameras were able to determine not all of the booster's engines were firing, and periodic changes in the rocket's flame seemed to indicate a few things ceased in rather fiery ways, actually. Once making it through Max Q, the rocket ceased its upward movement, and the booster and Starship tumbled toward the ocean, where they were ultimately blown up prior to impact. As has been pointed out by a lot of people on social media, had this happened during the SLS launch of Artemis in November 2022, it would have led to congressional hearings and folks would have probably been fired at the very least, and the program could have been canceled. SLS represents our historic way of designing missions. Large government contractors spend years and billions of dollars carefully building things that are supposed to work correctly the first time. And all failure modes have to be thought up ahead of time and engineered for without a lot or sometimes any data. SpaceX, however, uses an iterative approach that collects data and refines designs as version after version gets put through its paces. The goals for this launch were pretty simple. Get off the ground, don't destroy the launch pad, and collect data to show how the next iteration can improve on the current design. And they got off the ground, they did not destroy the pad, and they collected data. Mission accomplished. With this launch, we're going to take a moment to look at the Starship program in general and how it is set to radically change how we approach spaceflight. In 2017, 7 years into the highly successful Falcon 9 program, Elon Musk announced plans to build a rocket with the capacity to launch upwards of 150 tons into orbit. Codenamed the Big Falcon Rocket, or BFR, the original plan was to construct a lightweight, fully reusable carbon fiber rocket that would be manufactured in LA and shipped to launch sites around the nation. Just a year later, the first few segments and all tooling equipment were scrapped, as SpaceX realized that carbon fiber is expensive to work with and produces a lot of scrap material. Essentially, they were finding that for every 1 kilogram of carbon fiber used in a final piece, they were looking at 35% waste material and a cost of $200. With steel, the material they switched to, it's just $3 per kilogram, and they can just melt down and reuse scrap. Steel also has one super important advantage other than cost. It can be formulated to tolerate high temperatures. A carbon fiber spacecraft would need to be coated with ceramic tiles or other insulating material to protect it during re-entry. This would drive up cost and weight and make the entire system a bit more fragile. The same problem is present in aluminum spacecraft. In 2003, it was the loss of protective tiles that led to the Space Shuttle Columbia's aluminum frame overheating and failing during atmospheric re-entry. With steel, they'll need to put protective tiles on what will be the underbelly of Starship, but everything else can just be steel, making this a straightforward to manufacture and harder to destroy spacecraft. And this is a fully reusable system from the tip of the Starship to the grid fins of the Super Heavy booster. Current plans have the Super Heavy boosters returning to their launch sites where they can be caught by massive mechanical arms on the launch pad. These arms are referred to as the chopsticks. And in addition to catching the boosters, they are also used to stack the starships atop the booster. SpaceX's radical changes in plans ultimately will save the company money. But early in the process, concerns were expressed that Starship's development could end up costing taxpayers a large amount of money. It didn't. Initial development is funded in a lot of different ways, including through the sale of the first planned lunar launch to Japanese billionaire Yusaku Maezawa. Initially slated to occur in 2023, this mission, called Dear Moon, will carry Maezawa and 8 additional passengers, all creatives, who Maezawa hopes will find inspiration from their journey to and around the moon. Maezawa's exact contribution to the Starship program is undisclosed. Whatever the dollar amount, this bold use of space travel to inspire creative endeavors shows that the market for human spaceflight is evolving. While government-funded missions motivated by science and politics remain in the majority, we are starting to see other kinds of people funded to go to space thanks to the desire of billionaires to fund novel things. I don't see everyday people or even news bureaus being able to afford orbiting the planet any day soon. But if SpaceX is successful in truly lowering the cost of space travel to a few $1,000s per kilogram, we'll at least be in the range of millionaires being able to pay their own way. At this point, it is unlikely that Starship will be cleared to launch humans by the end of the year, and the current timeline for Dear Moon's launch is unknown. Nevertheless, the race is on to see if Starship or the Orion capsule will be the first to launch humans around the moon. Good money currently says Orion will win this old space versus commercial space race. But I am someone who always roots for the underdog. Starship development is also in part funded through NASA contracts to develop a special version to ferry astronauts back and forth from the surface of the moon. One of Starship's big innovations is the ability to be refueled in orbit. Initial designs called for 3 models: a human-rated launch vehicle, a cargo vehicle, and a fuel tanker. Joining this fleet is going to be a special human landing system, also called the Starship HLS. This vehicle will potentially be used as part of the 3rd Artemis mission no earlier than December 2025. NASA's original request for proposals for a lunar ferry called for the selected mission to be able to carry less than 2 tons to the surface of the moon and 1 ton back. In what is one of the most spectacular examples of overkill, Starship HLS will actually be able to carry 100 tons, not 1 ton, 100 tons, back and forth from the surface of the moon. The current mission profile calls for an empty Starship to be launched on a super heavy rocket and to rendezvous in orbit with a Starship refueling ship. Once refueled, it will journey to lunar orbit where it will wait for a tiny Orion capsule to arrive with astronauts that it can ferry on a 7-day journey to the lunar surface. Alternatively, it will be able to dock with a lunar space station and pick up and return astronauts there. The currently planned habitation and logistics outpost is actually significantly smaller than Starship. And I have to wonder if a successful Starship program with its large launch volume will lead to a rethinking of lunar station plans. But around EVSN, we try very hard not to count our spacecraft before they launch. And while Starship and a Super Heavy booster have made it into the sky, they haven't made it into space. And anything can still happen, or fail to happen. I have to say, though, Gwen Shotwell's leadership as president of SpaceX has convinced me they are going to succeed, just maybe not on previously tweeted timelines. Looking towards the future, a successful Starship and Super Heavy booster program will change how we think about space. With the capacity to launch 150 tons to low Earth orbit, this rocket will make it straightforward to launch everything from giant telescopes to entire constellations of satellites with a single liftoff. And with all this stuff we'll be able to cheaply launch, putting telescopes above most satellites is going to become more of a necessity if we want to avoid satellite streaks in our images. I don't dare guess what innovations will come. I only know that student projects will be able to affordably take flight and more science will be possible. Starship, however, wasn't designed for low Earth orbit. Starship was designed as the first step toward getting humans living on Mars. I have to admit to having a lot of misgivings about that goal. There are significant challenges ahead, including finding a way to protect astronauts from the radiation of space and to figure out how to keep them alive on a planet with the wrong atmosphere, wrong gravity, and not a lot of arable soil. We're not ready to go to Mars with people. But the technology Starship will enable as it works toward that goal of getting towards Mars, that technology is going to power science. And I'm here for the discoveries that are coming. After the break, Past Me will return to look at technology news, and Eric will be joining me for this week's Tales from the Launchpad. Stay tuned. I don't know about you, but not all my technology is exactly new. Back in 2012, I got a MacBook Air that is no longer the best of computers, but thanks to regular updates, that little laptop still works well enough to let me stream videos while putting away laundry. Keeping my ancient laptop going isn't too hard. I turn it on, I check for updates, and off I go. Thanks to Apple, new capabilities can still get added to my ancient system. And my laptop isn't the only electronics learning new tricks. Mars Curiosity landed on Mars in August 2012, and earlier this month it received major system updates. Installed between April 3 and 7, these updates give Curiosity the ability to drive faster, they will reduce the wear and tear on its wheels, and will upgrade about 180 other things. This is Curiosity's first major software overhaul since 2016. Beyond adding new functionality, it also cleans up code that has been patched multiple times since 2012. According to a release from NASA, quote, "The rover can now do more of what the team calls thinking while driving, something NASA's newest Mars rover, Perseverance, can perform in a more advanced way to navigate around rocks and sand traps. When Perseverance drives, it constantly snaps pictures of the terrain ahead, processing them with a dedicated computer so it can autonomously navigate during one continuous drive." End quote. While the computers on Curiosity aren't able to process fast enough for Curiosity to rove with Percy's speed, Curiosity will be able to explore with shorter pauses between movements than previously. This will allow it to use less energy getting from place to place and free it to spend more energy doing science. And when you think about Curiosity as having computers more than a decade old, it is really remarkable to see all that it is still capable of doing and learning. It's unknown just how long Mars Curiosity will keep exploring. Designed to last a minimum of 14 years, this rover has a radiothermal generator that allows it to stay powered through dust storms and stay warm through the worst of Martian winters. Given NASA's history of having missions last years to decades longer than expected, I can only hope that this software update is just one of many that will keep this rover lasting longer than any laptop. Mars Ingenuity is one of the best examples of engineering surpassing all expectations. This little helicopter arrived on Mars' surface in February 2021, and took its first flight 2 years ago on April 19th. Originally expected to only last for up to 5 flights and to never leave the rover's landing site, little Jenny is still alive and well. She has flown more than 11 kilometers as she accompanies Perseverance rover on explorations of Jezero Crater. Jenny has scouted ahead for Percy and flown over regions too dangerous for the rover to explore, returning stunning images of areas we'd otherwise never have seen. The ongoing success of the Ingenuity helicopter lays the ground for future missions to also carry rotorcraft. The 2027 Dragonfly mission to Saturn's moon Titan will carry a quadcopter, which will flit over this fascinating world's surface. Here is to hoping that that mission stays on time and, like Jenny, is able to fly further than anyone expects. Next up, I'm pleased to welcome on aerospace correspondent Eric Mattis for this week's Tales from the Launchpad. Hey, Eric.
Hi, Pamela. A lot happened this week, and we're going to start with the things that actually went into orbit. SpaceX launched the Transporter 7 mission on April 15th from Vandenberg Space Force Base in California, carrying 51 satellites into orbit. A few that caught our eye included IMCE, a Turkish imaging satellite, three small sats for GHG Sat, a constellation of small satellites that track emissions of methane and carbon dioxide from different industrial sites around the world, and Orb Astro A F1 by Astroforges, which is preloaded with simulated asteroid material which will be processed on orbit by the company's Forge. The company hopes to eventually mine asteroids for real. On April 16th, a Chinese Long March 4B launched the Fengyun 3G satellite from the Qiuchen Satellite Launch Center. Fengyun 3G is a weather satellite that will be operated by the China Meteorological Administration. Using its four instruments, it'll be able to look into storms and provide a three-dimensional image of their structure. This is useful in predicting their intensity and developing a response. On April 19th, SpaceX launched another batch of Starlink satellites from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida. This launch carried a couple dozen of the new mini Starlink 2 satellites that were originally supposed to be launched on Starship, but were slimmed down to fit inside the much smaller fairing of Falcon 9. The launch and booster recovery were both successful. And finally, Starship. As Pamela mentioned, the launch on Thursday was not a complete success, to say understating it a bit much. I'm actually recording this a day after she recorded, so this is more future me. Starship did leave the launch pad, but new images show significant damage beneath the pad. The separation was also not successful, and they had to activate the flight termination system to end the flight as safely as possible. SpaceX's John Innsbrucker said during their launch coverage, quote, "Obviously, this does not appear to be a nominal situation. We still don't know why it failed, but there is a lot of speculation on the internet. When we have facts instead of theory, we'll bring them to you here on EVSN." On Thursday night, the Federal Aviation Administration grounded Starship pending a completely standard mishap investigation to ensure that, quote, "any system, process, or procedure related to the mishap does not affect public safety." At this point, there's no indication of how long the investigation will take. According to the FAA's website, some mishap investigations might conclude in a matter of weeks. Other more complex investigations might take several months. Once concluded, it will have determined the root cause of the event and identified corrective actions SpaceX must implement to avoid a reoccurrence of the event. In the best of situations, the mission's telemetry will identify the exact problem and will be something already planned for upgrade in the next Starship version. Just to say it again, space is hard. Their goal was to get off the ground and over to Hawaii, and they succeeded in getting off the ground. They did not get to Hawaii. As NASA Administrator Bill Nelson said to SpaceX shortly after the flight, congrats to SpaceX on Starship's first integrated flight test. Every great achievement throughout history has demanded some level of calculated risk, because with great risk comes great reward. Looking forward to all that SpaceX learns to the next flight test and beyond. End quote. And he's right. SpaceX calculated risks, and sometimes those risks don't play out exactly as expected. As long as they're learning from things when they don't go quite right, progress can happen. One of the challenges for lawmakers as the commercial space sector grows is who's going to regulate it. This is especially important for space tourism. Should it be the FAA, who is already regulating the aviation sector, or NASA, which knows all about space but isn't a regulatory body, like the FAA, or perhaps some other body that may not even exist? Regardless, whoever ends up regulating it, the lawmakers are going to be careful not to create an overbearing regulatory framework so they can have balance of ensuring that the industry operates in a safe manner while not stifling its ability to develop and compete. That's it for launches. Now let's look at some stats. We keep track of orbital launches by launch site, also called spaceport. According to rocketlaunch.live, so far this year, the US has had 29 launches, China 17, Kazakhstan 4, Japan, India, and Russia have each had 2, and French Guiana, Israel, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom each have had 1. These 60 launches do not include Starship because it wouldn't have been an orbital launch. Of those 60 launches, there have been 4 failures, reminding us that space is hard.
Thanks, Eric. I'm going to let you all in on a not so secret fact. A lot of times we write stories in hopes that missions will launch before they actually launch. This means that last week's story about the JUICE mission was put together before we got to see the rocket go up. And we missed sharing with you one of the funniest things I have seen in rocket launch coverage. But what we missed last week, I can bring you this week. Folks, a sloth that was named Jerry wandered into the launch facility in French Guiana and mugged for the camera. Why the sloth wandered out of his tree is unknown, but let's face it, in a world as complex as ours, sometimes we don't need to know why the sloth crossed the field. We just need to be happy that it did. Now, before you worry about the fate of Jerry, I'd like to assure you that a team from the European Spaceport went out and picked up Jerry and moved him to, I quote, an area of greater tranquility, end quote. Thanks for the laughs, Jerry. May you view all launches from a safe distance. And that's it for now. Good night, everyone. And remember to go out and look up.